The piercing sound of police sirens shattered the peaceful morning in Marina del Rey on August 15, 2015, as red and blue lights reflected off the windows of luxury high-rise towers. Neighbors peered through expensive floor-to-ceiling windows, wondering what could have disturbed their exclusive waterfront enclave. The focal point of all this activity was Harbor View Towers, the gleaming residential complex where Los Angeles's young elite lived in climate-controlled comfort. Though at that moment nobody knew it, this morning would unravel one of the most shocking scandals to rock LA's immigrant community. The victim was Sierra Wallace, 22 years old, daughter of billionaire Grant Wallace. But the man who would become the most hated figure in the story wasn't even present at the scene. Vikram Joshi, a 35-year-old financial analyst from Mumbai, was 15 miles away in his modest Koreatown apartment, unaware that his carefully constructed American dream was about to become his worst nightmare. Vikram Joshi had been the embodiment of immigrant determination, a story of calculated success that parents in middle-class Mumbai neighborhoods told their children. At 35, he cut an unassuming but impressive figure in the Los Angeles business community, medium height with neatly trimmed black hair and pressed shirts that spoke of careful budgeting rather than wealth. His story began like many others, arriving from Mumbai in 2012 with an engineering degree, big dreams, and the golden ticket of an H-1B visa. But where others struggled to adapt, Vikram soared. Over 3 years, he had built his reputation at Wallace Capital, from a nervous newcomer into a respected senior financial analyst. The company specialized in private equity and corporate restructuring, riding the post-recession recovery with perfect timing and Vikram's uncanny ability to spot undervalued assets. His rise through the corporate world had been methodical, from junior analyst to senior analyst, from sharing a studio apartment in the valley to renting a modest one-bedroom in Koreatown. His life was a testament to careful planning and sacrifice. The apartment reflected this discipline. Clean, organized, minimal furniture, and a small corner altar where photos of his parents sat beside a brass statue of Ganesha. Every morning began with a cup of tea and a video call to Mumbai, updating his family on his progress toward permanent residency. Every evening ended with the same prayer: "Let me stay another day." The visa anxiety was constant, a background hum that influenced every decision. He worked 12-hour days not from ambition alone, but from the knowledge that unemployment meant deportation. He avoided confrontations, always said "yes, sir," and maintained the careful balance between competence and invisibility that defined survival for H-1B workers. Wallace Capital occupied 47 floors of a Century City glass tower, a monument to American financial power where deals worth hundreds of millions were negotiated over expensive lunches. The company culture was exactly what Vikram had expected: elite, high pressure, and predominantly white. Grant Wallace commanded this empire from the corner office, a self-made billionaire known for his ruthless business acumen and protective instincts toward his family. For Vikram, Wallace represented everything aspirational about American business: success. As a senior analyst, he was respected for his technical precision, but remained socially invisible. He worked in a cubicle on the 32nd floor, surrounded by colleagues who were professionally cordial but personally distant. Office dynamics followed unspoken rules. Inclusion in golf outings was for partners, client dinners were for senior management, and analysts like Vikram provided the expertise that made others look brilliant. In a place like this, knowing your position was survival. It was during his 3rd year that Sierra Wallace joined the company for what Grant generously called hands-on corporate experience. At 22, she was a recent Stanford graduate with an economics degree and the kind of effortless confidence that came from never worrying about basic security. Sierra possessed everything Vikram could only dream of: American citizenship, family wealth, and the freedom to take risks, because failure would never mean homelessness. She was beautiful in that distinctly California way, tall, athletic, with sun-streaked blonde hair and the radiant health that expensive nutrition provided. But what struck Vikram during their first encounter at the office coffee machine wasn't her appearance. It was her genuine curiosity about perspectives different from her own. "You're the analyst who caught that pharmaceutical company's hidden liabilities," she said, approaching with a confident smile. "I read your report. Most people would have missed those offshore connections." Their conversation lasted 20 minutes, covering everything from corporate due diligence to the differences between American and Indian business practices. For Sierra, Vikram represented something intriguing: success achieved through merit, rather than inheritance, intelligence combined with humility. For Vikram, she was a glimpse into a world he could observe but never truly enter. As summer 2015 progressed, these coffee machine encounters became more frequent. Sierra would ask about his analysis methods, his background, his thoughts on market trends. The attention was flattering and dangerous in equal measure. Vikram's visa renewal was pending in 6 months. His parents had invested their life savings in his education. His entire future depended on maintaining the careful balance he had spent 3 years perfecting. The Indian community watched successful professionals like hawks, ready to celebrate achievements or whisper about failures. In America, one mistake could erase everything. And somewhere between the 32nd and 47th floors of that Century City Tower, a mistake was already beginning to take shape. What began as innocent coffee conversations in September 2015 evolved into something neither Vikram nor Sierra had planned. Their first real conversation happened during a late evening at Wallace Capital, when most employees had gone home, but Vikram remained at his desk, working on a complex merger analysis. Sierra appeared at his cubicle around 8 p.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee from the executive kitchen. "Thought you might need this," she said, settling into the chair beside his desk. "Dad always says the best deals are made after business hours when people drop their masks." Over the next 3 months, a pattern emerged that would define their relationship. What started as professional curiosity gradually became personal fascination. Sierra would find reasons to visit the 32nd floor, always with a business question that somehow led to longer conversations about books, philosophy, and the pressures of living up to family expectations. Their cultural exchange became intoxicating for both. Sierra was genuinely fascinated by Vikram's stories of Mumbai, the chaos and beauty of a city where 15 million people somehow coexisted, the family dynamics where 3 generations shared small apartments, the festival celebrations that lasted for days. "Your life sounds so authentic," she would say. "Everything here feels manufactured." For Vikram, Sierra's curiosity was a revelation. Most Americans he encountered were politely disinterested in his background, treating his Indian heritage as an interesting footnote rather than a rich tapestry of experience. Sierra asked detailed questions about everything. From the significance of Sanskrit prayers his grandmother taught him to the complex politics of regional Indian cinema. Their after-hours encounters became routine. Sierra would time her departures to coincide with Vikram's late nights, leading to accidental meetings in the elevator, shared rides to the parking garage, and eventually dinner conversations that stretched past midnight. She would critique her father's business associates with surprising insight, while Vikram shared his observations about American corporate culture from an outsider's perspective. The power dynamic between them was complex and dangerous. Sierra held every advantage: American citizenship, family wealth, social connections that could open any door. But Vikram possessed something she had never encountered: intellectual depth combined with genuine humility, success earned through merit, rather than inheritance. Both felt misunderstood in their respective worlds, creating a connection that transcended their obvious differences. The first kiss happened on December 3rd, during a late night when they found themselves alone in the Wallace Capital conference room. The city lights of Los Angeles sparkled 40 floors below as they worked on a presentation that Sierra was supposed to deliver to the board. Their hands brushed, reaching for the same document, and the tension that had been building for months finally broke. "This could destroy everything I've worked for," Vikram whispered against her lips even as he pulled her closer. "Finally, someone who sees me for who I am," Sierra replied, her voice carrying years of frustration at being defined solely as Grant Wallace's daughter. What followed was a secret relationship that required elaborate planning and constant vigilance. Sierra's Marina del Rey apartment became their sanctuary, a luxury high-rise where Grant Wallace never visited, considering it too bohemian for his taste. The apartment was Sierra's declaration of independence, decorated with art from local galleries rather than the museum pieces that filled her father's Beverly Hills mansion. Their meeting places were carefully chosen for discretion. Small restaurants in Echo Park, where none of Grant's associates would venture, weekend drives to Malibu beaches where they could walk without recognition, overnight trips to Santa Barbara that Sierra disguised as Stanford alumni events. Each location was selected for its distance from Wallace Capital's sphere of influence. The emotional intimacy that developed surprised them both. Vikram shared fears he had never voiced, the constant anxiety about visa renewal, the pressure of supporting his parents' hopes, the loneliness of building a life in a country that treated him as permanently temporary. Sierra revealed the suffocating weight of inherited expectations, the challenge of proving herself in a world where everyone assumed her success was purchased rather than earned. Their physical relationship developed naturally, but it was the emotional connection that proved most addictive. For the first time in his adult life, Vikram felt seen as a complete person rather than a useful immigrant. For Sierra, Vikram represented escape from the gilded cage of her father's ambitions. They established strict protocols to maintain secrecy. No personal communication during work hours, separate arrivals and departures from any location, cash payments to avoid credit card trails that could be traced. Sierra even purchased a second phone for their private conversations, storing it in her apartment rather than carrying it to the office. By February 2016, the relationship had deepened beyond casual affair into genuine attachment. Sierra began, speaking about their future together, making offhand comments about introducing him to her college friends, suggesting they take a vacation to Europe together. Vikram found himself caught between enjoying these fantasies and growing increasingly anxious about the impossibility of their situation. The red flags appeared gradually but unmistakably. Sierra's mood would shift dramatically when Vikram was unavailable for their planned meetings, even when work commitments provided legitimate excuses. She would make casual references to telling daddy about you during arguments, using her father's power as leverage, without seeming to understand the devastating implications for Vikram's career and immigration status. The paranoia began affecting Vikram's work performance. He would check his phone obsessively during meetings, worry that their secret was visible to observant colleagues, and lose sleep calculating the probability of discovery. His carefully maintained professional mask was beginning to slip, just as Sierra's possessiveness was intensifying. The pregnancy revelation came on March 15, 2016, in Sierra's apartment overlooking the marina. She had been acting strangely for days, excited but secretive, making cryptic comments about their future. When she finally told him, Vikram's world collapsed. "I'm pregnant," she said simply, watching his face with the intensity of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. Sierra's reaction was immediate joy. She saw the pregnancy as validation of their connection, a sign that their relationship was meant to evolve into something permanent and public. "This changes everything," she said, already imagining how they would announce their relationship to her father, how they would build a life together. Vikram's response was immediate panic. His mind raced through the catastrophic implications: Grant, Wallace's rage, the destruction of his career, the visa complications that would arise from sudden family obligations, the scandal that would destroy both their reputations. "We need to think about this carefully," he managed to say. But Sierra had already moved past thinking to planning. She pushed for immediate public acknowledgement of their relationship, dismissed his concerns about professional consequences, and suggested marriage as the obvious solution to any complications. When Vikram tried to explain the practical realities, the visa implications, the cultural expectations from his family, the professional suicide such revelation would represent, Sierra accused him of not loving her enough. Their first major argument lasted 3 hours and ended with Sierra's ultimatum: "Choose me and our child or lose us both." Everything that happened next was inevitable. The first sign of Vikram's withdrawal came the morning after Sierra's pregnancy announcement. For the first time in 3 years at Wallace Capital, He arrived early and left precisely at 5 p.m., avoiding the late evening hours when Sierra typically made her rounds through the office. His phone, once answered immediately regardless of the hour, began going straight to voicemail. Text messages that had previously been returned within minutes now remained unread for hours, then days. Sierra's initial confusion quickly transformed into determination, then desperation. She began showing up at his Koreatown apartment at odd hours, 6 a.m. before work, midnight after failed attempts to catch him at the office. The security camera footage from his building would later show her sitting in her BMW for hours, waiting for him to return from errands he now scheduled strategically to avoid her presence. "I thought you loved me," became her constant refrain during the few conversations she managed to corner him into. Her voice carried the bewilderment of someone who had never been denied anything important to her. When Vikram suggested she consider handling the pregnancy independently, offering financial support from a distance, Sierra's confusion turned to rage. The transformation was swift and terrifying. The curious, intelligent woman who had charmed him with questions about Indian philosophy became someone he no longer recognized. Her text messages, once filled with inside jokes and thoughtful observations, turned into lengthy manifestos about betrayal and abandonment. She began researching immigration law with the intensity she had once applied to corporate analysis, learning about H-1B dependencies and the vulnerability of temporary workers. "I'll tell my father you manipulated me," she threatened during a confrontation in the Wallace Capital parking garage in April 2016, "that you used me to secure your green card, that everything between us was calculated." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a coldness that made Vikram's blood freeze. "Do you have any idea what happens to foreign workers who take advantage of American women?" The threats escalated with surgical precision. Sierra had clearly consulted lawyers, understanding exactly which accusations would be most damaging to an H-1B worker's immigration status. She spoke casually about claiming coercion, about painting their relationship as predatory manipulation by a desperate immigrant seeking citizenship through any means necessary. Her therapist sessions, which had begun during college to address what she called daddy issues, revealed a pattern that should have been warning enough. Dr. Martinez's notes documented a young woman with severe abandonment issues, someone who had learned to weaponize her father's influence whenever relationships didn't develop according to her expectations. Sierra had never learned to process rejection in healthy ways, having been shielded from real consequences her entire life. The ultimatum came on May 20th, 2016, delivered with the casual cruelty that only the truly privileged could manage. "Choose me and our child, or lose everything you've built in America." When Vikram gave his final, gentle but firm refusal, Sierra's mask finally dropped completely. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who had never failed to get revenge. "Everyone will know what you really are." Grant Wallace's involvement began with his daughter's carefully orchestrated confession. Sierra presented a version of events that painted herself as the naive victim of a calculating immigrant who had identified her as a pathway to permanent residency. She claimed Vikram had researched her family, strategically pursued her, and then abandoned her when the relationship became inconvenient for his career ambitions. Grant's reaction was immediate and devastating. Within 48 hours, Vikram was called into a meeting with Human Resources and informed that his position was being eliminated due to restructuring and performance concerns. The termination was executed with surgical precision. No severance package, references that would damn him with faint praise, and whispered suggestions to industry contacts that he had been involved in inappropriate workplace conduct. The private investigator Grant hired began building a case designed to destroy Vikram's immigration status. Phone records were subpoenaed, financial transactions analyzed for signs of gift-giving that could be construed as manipulation, and former colleagues interviewed about Vikram's character and intentions. Immigration authorities received anonymous tips about a foreign worker who had misrepresented his intentions on his visa application. Vikram's visa renewal, which had been progressing smoothly through the bureaucratic process, suddenly stalled. Requests for additional documentation multiplied. Interviews were scheduled and rescheduled. The lawyer he finally managed to hire, after burning through most of his savings, explained grimly that someone with significant influence was clearly working against his application. The professional destruction was swift and complete. Los Angeles's private equity community was small and insular. Word spread quickly about the Indian analyst who had been terminated from Wallace Capital under mysterious circumstances. Job applications that should have resulted in interviews were met with polite rejections. Networking contacts who had previously been friendly became suddenly unavailable. The Indian community in Los Angeles, always protective of its collective reputation, began distancing itself from the scandal. Temple gatherings where Vikram had once been welcomed became exercises in polite avoidance. Community leaders, afraid of being associated with controversy, stopped returning his calls. The isolation was profound and deliberate. By June 2016, Vikram had become a ghost in his own life. He rarely left his apartment except for essential errands, convinced that every encounter might lead to arrest or deportation. His parents' weekly video calls became exercises in careful deception as he struggled to explain his situation without causing them panic. Sleep became impossible. Anxiety attacks struck without warning. The walls of his once comfortable apartment felt like they were closing in. Sierra's final message came on June 15th, delivered with the timing of someone who understood psychological warfare. "This isn't over. You destroyed my life, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." What Vikram didn't know was that Sierra's own mental state was deteriorating rapidly. Her therapist's notes from this period documented increasing paranoia, mood swings that alarmed her friends, and an obsessive focus on making Vikram pay for what he's done. The careful life Vikram had built over 3 years was unraveling with the speed that only coordinated destruction could achieve. Soon, there would be nothing left to destroy except the man himself. June 2016 marked the beginning of Sierra Wallace's final descent into a darkness that none of her friends could have predicted. The woman who had once moved through Los Angeles's elite social circles with confidence and charm had become someone her closest companions barely recognized. 2 weeks had passed since her last contact with Vikram. 2 weeks during which her obsession had transformed from heartbreak into something far more dangerous. Dr. Martinez, Sierra's therapist at Beverly Hills Wellness Center, documented increasingly alarming behavior during their sessions. "Patient exhibits severe emotional distress," her notes from June 20th recorded. "Discusses elaborate fantasies about reconciliation with unnamed romantic partner. Shows signs of dissociation when confronted with reality of relationship's end." The sessions, which had begun as routine therapy for anxiety and family pressure, now dealt with what Dr. Martinez privately described as a complete psychological breakdown. Sierra's friends noticed the changes immediately. Ashley Chen, her Stanford roommate and closest confidant, would later tell investigators that Sierra had become completely consumed by thoughts of Vikram. She would talk about him for hours, Ashley recalled, not just missing him, but detailed. Plans about how to win him back, how to make him understand what he was throwing away. It was obsessive and, honestly, it scared me. The prescription medication that was supposed to help her cope had instead become another source of concern. Dr. Robert Sterling, Sierra's psychiatrist, had prescribed a carefully controlled regimen of anxiety medication and sleeping pills after her initial breakdown in May. But pharmacy records would later show that Sierra had been doctor shopping, visiting multiple physicians and obtaining overlapping prescriptions for benzodiazepines and sleep aids. Family dynamics at the Wallace mansion had deteriorated significantly. Grant Wallace, accustomed to solving his daughter's problems through the application of money and influence, found himself helpless against her emotional collapse. Their conversations, once filled with business discussions and shared goals, now consisted of Sierra's rambling accusations about how his campaign against Vikram had ruined everything. She blamed her father for driving away the only man who had ever truly understood her, while simultaneously demanding that he find new ways to punish Vikram for abandoning her. The final night came on July 2nd, 2016. Security cameras in Harbor View Towers recorded Sierra returning to her apartment at 7:43 p.m. carrying a bottle of wine from the lobby's gourmet market. She appeared disheveled, her usually perfect appearance showing signs of the stress that had consumed her for weeks. The concierge, Marcus Rodriguez, would later testify that she seemed distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. What happened in Sierra's apartment over the next 12 hours would be reconstructed from digital evidence and the physical scene. Her phone records showed 17 attempted calls to Vikram's number between 8 p.m. and 3 a.m., each call lasting only long enough to reach his voicemail before she hung up. Text messages were typed and deleted repeatedly, a digital record of her mounting desperation and rage. The wine bottle found the next morning was half empty, alongside multiple empty prescription bottles that had been filled just days earlier. Security footage from the hallway showed no visitors, no disturbances, no signs of anyone else entering or leaving her unit during the critical hours. At 9:47 a.m. on July 3rd, Maria Gonzalez, Sierra's housekeeper, used her key to enter the apartment. For the weekly cleaning, the scene she discovered would haunt her for years. Sierra Wallace lying peacefully on her bedroom floor, dressed in an expensive silk nightgown, surrounded by family photos and what appeared to be handwritten letters. LAPD Detective Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran specializing in cases involving wealthy families, took the lead on what initially appeared to be a straightforward investigation. No signs of struggle, doors locked from inside, security cameras showing no unauthorized entry, her initial report noted. The apartment was immaculate, except for the empty bottles and the obvious signs of Sierra's final hours. The coroner's preliminary examination revealed the cause of death, a lethal combination of prescription sleeping medication and alcohol. The levels found in Sierra's system were sufficient to cause respiratory depression and cardiac arrest. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto, the Los Angeles County medical examiner, would later testify that the amount consumed suggested intentional rather than accidental overdose. The most revealing evidence came from Sierra's phone, where investigators discovered 47 unsent text messages composed during her final night. The messages, time-stamped between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., provided a chilling window into her mental state. You always run away when I need you. Even now you won't answer. I gave you everything, and you threw it away like it meant nothing. If I do this, you'll never forget me. You'll know what you destroyed. You'll see how much I loved you when it's too late. The investigation expanded to include interviews with everyone in Sierra's circle. Friends described her increasing isolation and obsession with Vikram. Colleagues at Wallace Capital noted her erratic behavior in recent weeks, missing meetings, emotional outbursts, and constant phone checking. Dr. Martinez, bound by patient confidentiality but able to speak in general terms, confirmed that Sierra had been dealing with severe relationship trauma and abandonment issues. Vikram's alibi was investigated thoroughly but proved solid. Security cameras at his apartment building, credit card records, and digital footprints all confirmed he had been home alone during the critical time frame. His phone records showed no outgoing calls to Sierra and no answered calls from her number. Whatever final messages she had tried to send him, they had been composed but never delivered. The official ruling came after 3 weeks of investigation: suicide by intentional overdose. The evidence was clear, the timeline established, and the psychological profile consistent with someone who had planned her own death as the ultimate expression of betrayal and revenge. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already decided. Sierra Wallace was the victim, and Vikram Joshi was the destroyer, regardless of what the evidence actually showed. The media circus began before Sierra Wallace's body was cold. Grant Wallace, a man who had spent decades manipulating public perception to protect his business interests, understood that narrative control was everything. Within hours of the official suicide ruling, his public relations team had crafted a story that would dominate headlines for months. Foreign worker manipulates billionaire's daughter in green card scheme gone wrong. The Los Angeles Times ran the first major story on July 5, 2016, with a headline that would define public opinion: Indian analyst's secret affair leads to tragic death of tech heiress. The article, based entirely on anonymous sources close to the Wallace family, painted Vikram as a calculating predator who had identified Sierra as a pathway to American citizenship. Grant Wallace's public statement was masterfully crafted. "My daughter was taken advantage of by someone who saw her kindness as weakness and her trust as opportunity." Cable news picked up the story with the enthusiasm that only a scandal involving wealth, immigration, and tragedy could generate. Fox News ran segments about visa fraud and the vulnerability of American women to foreign manipulation. CNN explored the darker side of H-1B programs and workplace relationships. Each report reinforced the same narrative. Sierra Wallace was an innocent victim of immigrant opportunism. The online harassment began on social media platforms where Vikram's photo, address, and personal information spread like wildfire. Reddit threads with titles like "Foreign Predator Kills American Girl" accumulated thousands of comments calling for his deportation, arrest, and worse. Death threats filled his email inbox. His LinkedIn profile was bombarded with accusations and slurs. Someone created a fake Facebook page in his name, posting inflammatory content designed to further destroy his reputation. The Indian-American community, always sensitive to how individual scandals might affect their collective standing, made the calculated decision to distance themselves. The India Cultural Center of Los Angeles issued a statement condemning predatory behavior by those who abuse the trust placed in them by American institutions. Temple leaders quietly asked Vikram to stop attending services. Community leaders, who had once welcomed him at cultural events, now treated him as radioactive. Despite the media frenzy, no criminal charges were ever filed. The LAPD investigation had been thorough and conclusive. Sierra Wallace had died by suicide, and there was no evidence of criminal wrongdoing by anyone else. But in the court of public opinion, Vikram Joshi had already been tried, convicted, and sentenced to social execution. The systemic failures that destroyed Vikram's life revealed themselves with surgical precision. His H-1B visa renewal, which had been stalled even before Sierra's death, was formally denied 3 weeks after the suicide. Immigration officials cited character concerns and questions about the applicant's intentions in seeking residency. No criminal charges were necessary. Mere association with scandal was sufficient grounds for deportation. Wallace Capital emerged from the tragedy with its reputation intact. Grant Wallace appeared at Sierra's memorial service as a grieving father, not as a man whose vindictive campaign had contributed to the circumstances of his daughter's death. The company's stock price barely fluctuated. Board members expressed sympathy for the family's loss and moved on to quarterly earnings reports. Corporate America had closed ranks around one of its own. The media's responsibility for sensationalism over facts became apparent only in retrospect. Reporters who had eagerly published anonymous accusations from the Wallace camp never followed up on Sierra's documented mental health struggles or her history of using her father's influence to punish romantic rejections. The narrative of immigrant manipulation was too compelling to complicate with inconvenient truths about privilege and mental illness. Class dynamics determined which version of events became accepted reality. Grant Wallace's billions could purchase narrative control in ways that Vikram's modest savings never could. Expensive public relations firms crafted soundbites, while immigration lawyers struggled to navigate a system designed to favor wealth and influence over justice and truth. Vikram's final weeks in America were spent in hiding, selling his possessions, and saying goodbye to dreams that had sustained him for 4 years. His voluntary departure was a legal fiction designed to avoid the formal deportation that would have barred him from ever returning. He left Los Angeles on August 15, 2016, exactly 1 year after arriving at LAX with such hope and determination. The return to Mumbai was devastating in ways that transcended professional failure. His parents, who had sacrificed everything to support his American education, struggled to understand how their successful son had become the center of an international scandal. Extended family members whispered about what really happened. Community members avoided his father at the local market, and marriage prospects for his younger sister were complicated by association with the family's shame. Career prospects in India were equally bleak. News of the scandal had traveled across the internet, and Mumbai's financial sector buzzed with rumors about the analyst who had been deported from America under mysterious circumstances. Job interviews became exercises in defending his character, rather than demonstrating his qualifications. He eventually found work as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm, earning a tenth of his former Wallace Capital salary. The psychological trauma remained untreated for years. India's mental health resources were limited, and the stigma surrounding therapy meant that Vikram suffered in silence. He never married, never spoke publicly about his experiences, and lived with the constant question that haunted his sleepless nights: did I cause this? The system that failed Vikram continues unchanged. Similar cases unfold regularly across America, where immigrant workers remain vulnerable to accusations that can destroy their lives regardless of truth or evidence. In America, justice isn't always just, and sometimes the American dream becomes an American nightmare that haunts both the dreamer and those left behind.